Hello and very welcome to JW Prime Live. Your Where is here. Today, we are going to talk about geospatial knowledge infrastructure and sustainability of everything. I'm Sanjay Kumar, the editor-in-chief of Geospatial World, and I'll have very eminent guest today to discuss about the concept of geospatial knowledge infrastructure and its role in sustainability of everything. Before I introduce our guest, let me just throw a bit of light on geospatial knowledge infrastructure. Well, we have talked about spatial data infrastructure for almost 25 years and various kinds of data ecosystems coming together to build a kind of data platform. But when we move in the age of digital technologies, it is very much embedded inside that we start making use of geospatial data and technologies and the governance and policies together to deliver a knowledge services. When we talk of infrastructure, infrastructure is a kind of indication of commoditization and maturity model of using a capability in a commercial consumable way. So in recent past, geospatial data, geospatial knowledge has been very much integral part of the digital economy and society. How does it connect with sustainability of everything? The world is challenged by several sustainable issues. It's not just about climate change, but it's much more than climate change. Whereas climate change is a very important outcome of the mistakes which we as humanity have made. Now, how we can address this climate change or sustainability is by making uses of data and conversion of this data into knowledge services. And also, how we can see the uses of this knowledge platform to derive more productivity, more efficiency, more transparency, and more compliance. So that's what is all about sustainability of everything. In this context, let me introduce my guest today. We have with us today Dr. Greg Scott. Greg Scott is the executive director of SDG Data Alliance, which is an initiative of public foundation in collaboration with the United Nations and host of other institutions. I'm sure he will explain that. But more than this, Greg Scott is a very seasoned professional of geospatial technology, geospatial data, and have almost 3 decades of experience. He has worked with the Australian government before, and then he has worked with the United Nations. He's one of the anchors of the United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management Program. And almost 10 to 12 years, he led that initiative, and he just retired from United Nations and nothing could tire him. So he chose again to come back to the development community. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm great, Sanjay. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. And my apologies for keeping you awake late. You're in Australia, I believe so.
I am, but that's not a problem. Anything for you, my friend.
Thank you. And we'll also have Dr. Kumar Navulur. Dr. Kumar Navulur joined us from Colorado. Very good morning, Kumar.
Good morning, Sanjay. Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Kumar is a professional on remote sensing, space situation awareness, and a lot of other such technologies associated with the space. But one thing which actually brought me to invite him today was his thoughts about SDG satellites, which he had been thinking and socializing this idea for some time. And he has been with Maxer Group for almost 15 years or so, and he has just started his own company known as GeoCognition. and we'll get to know more about his company as well as how is he integrating his dream of SDG satellite and Earth observation into the sustainability of everything. So let's get going. Uh, Greg, what do you think about where we as a geospatial community are heading to in terms of ecosystem approach, or what is this whole concept of geospatial knowledge infrastructure and future geospatial ecosystem?
Yeah, we're on the journey, aren't we? I think, you sort of said at the start that SDIs and all these concepts are sort of 25 years in the making, and now we're starting to see, I think, some of the fruits of that early work starting to be realized. Um, I think we've still got a ways to go, but we're making huge progress. And I guess the reason why I'm still saying we've got a ways to go is that we're making some huge strides with the data and the technology and the services that we're seeing now. And with that, when we see what the capabilities around machine learning and AI bring to the table, the key thing around it too is, as you said, with the sustainability of everything, is also how do we ensure that sustainability is able to be applied, and those opportunities are able to be taken in a lot of the developing parts of the world as well. So, and that's an area of effort that I'm certainly focusing on, is how do we bring all of these capabilities and progress that's been made in the developed world, and how do we start applying those in the developing world? And I think the idea of knowledge and how we apply knowledge is going to be key to that.
So, Greg, just taking this discussion forward, you just joined SDG Data Alliance. So, how do you think that SDG Data Alliance is helping you, or is a tool for actually, transitioning some of your thoughts of supporting developing countries to apply this knowledge and help them develop their economy and society?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the SDG Data Alliance was established in July 2021. So it's sort of 3 years old. But the reason it was established was to try and give developing countries a better capacity and ability to use geospatial technologies, to use the data that's becoming more prevalent and available, and work across government agencies within and across countries to get a much better understanding of their national circumstances, their national arrangements around the different SDGs, the different goals, and then how they could use them to measure and monitor and make progress. So it's really about saying, how do we apply geospatial information, enabling technologies, data and resources to the human element, to those human capabilities, in a way where they can see socioeconomic benefit and environmental benefit, the evidence that helps in that decision making. And that's really what the Data Alliance is doing. We're working with 20 or so countries, particularly least developed countries, to help them help themselves in some of these areas.
So you talked about knowledge capacity, that your main mission is to actually build knowledge capacity of developing countries and help them learn from the experiences of the developed nations. That's a great mission. We'll take forward this discussion with you, Greg. But let me bring in Kumar at the moment. Kumar, what do you think about this SDG data, SDG satellite which you have been talking about, and also what's this GeoCognition going to do in furthering your vision of supporting EO for SDGs?
Sanjay, when we talk about SDG sats, right? First of all, it's about constellation. One satellite by itself can only do so much. It's the constellation that's where you get the power. One of the things, as we all know today, is every square inch of the planet is being collected by these satellite sensors. And having a data source just allocate for SDGs, in my opinion, will help the developing nations Greg has been talking about. But the key thing that's actually pretty exciting for me is how the new space has brought the cost of these satellites down. 10 years ago, a satellite that could collect 50 centimeter imagery was close to $500 million. Now we are talking about satellites that are less than 10 million to do the same. So I think this concept of SDG SATs, I think is a reality that can happen in the next, I would say, few years. Just finding the right people to actually help do that. From the geocognition perspective, the idea here is I think you started with the knowledge. Cognition is all about knowledge, understanding what is happening around there. So, what I actually am focusing on is from the geocognition perspective, if you look at the workflows of just taking a simple example of digitizing a road, people have been doing the same thing using the technology, sitting in front of a desktop computer, and that has been happening for almost 4 decades. So the technology is not only AI ML, but also something like gaming can make these geospatial workflows a lot better, a lot faster and cheaper, and also attracts the future workforce. If you look at our young kids these days, they are growing up with gaming technologies, AR, VR. So at GeoCognition, I'm trying to bring all of them so that we actually transform the geospatial workflows to convert the data we've been talking about into knowledge.
So you meant to say that, if I get you correct, on the one side, the Earth observation constellations are actually providing a lot of richness to the data, collection capability. At the same time, it is becoming very affordable. It's not as expensive as it was. It's very affordable. And then all the data which you are collecting on different themes at different resolutions can be processed by the technologies very quickly and actually convert itself into the knowledge. So if that knowledge can be utilized by the geospatial platform. So Greg, this geospatial data ecosystem already has, you know, integration of different kinds of I would say data themes, fundamental data themes that you have seen in IGIF. And now we have the constellations, which is powering that, or rather enriching that whole ecosystem. And then we have AI ML tools to actually make it convert very quickly into the knowledge services. How do you see this whole, narrative, being seen by the decision makers in developing countries, or the development community? Are they able to understand this narrative, or how is their reaction to this?
That is a really super good question. And in fact, I'm having a challenge on that right now, where we're actually at the moment with the Data Alliance and Public Foundation, we're preparing for some side events for the Small Island Developing States Conference, the SIDS4 conference, which is going to be held in Antigua and Barbuda in late May this year. It's a decade renewal of a program of action, the last one being the Samoa Pathway in 2014. What's really interesting is that the new program of action here is talking about the use of data, or the availability of data. And it's got two key references of not only being able to disaggregate data and account for geographic remoteness in islands, given that a lot of small island developing states have low populations, remote islands, etc. But also the ability for these small island developing states to downscale global data. So thinking of the data that Kumar was just talking about, and when we think about global data that's been collected hour by hour, minute by minute, on many different variables, environmental variables, oceans, ecosystems, all of these, sea surface temperature, sea level rise, ocean health, climate conditions, all of these. This data is readily available. Decision makers don't even know it exists. They don't know where to go. They don't know what it does. They don't know how to access it. They don't have the opportunity. And so really what this is about is saying, how do we bring down all of this data that's floating around out there and focus it onto problems and questions? So for example, what we're thinking about is taking all of this global data that countries can use, but saying, how do I tune that to the needs of SIDS? And then within the SIDS, how do I tune that to an individual country? And within that country, how do I tune that to a remote island in terms of my fishing, or my tourism, or my coral reef, those sort of things? So how do we bring that data to the table and how do we give access to the data? How do we have the right governance and provenance around it? But the opportunity for these decision makers and their citizens to be able to use it, and for governments to be able to use it, that's the crux. It's kind of, it's amazing that people do not know what they do not know. And it's how we explain and bring that narrative to the table to actually be more solutions orientated with the data.
So we need to zoom in, we kind of zoom in from space to the local problem, that how this whole ecosystem of the technologies and constellations and platforms doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is that how it is going to address their question on the ground at a place. So that's a very
Yes.
interesting thing. But now looking at this big challenge that we're all technologists and we all data experts, not me, thankfully. So you guys, when you build all these, systems and frameworks and concepts, how do we actually communicate this importance? Do we have live examples? Do we have case studies which can actually support sustainable development goals or demonstrate what if situations, model what if situations? If you do this, this is going to happen like this, or if you don't do this, this is going to happen like this. And you also brought in a very important topic of ocean. And I think I've been to World Ocean Summit recently. The amount of investment and attention is going on ocean mapping is phenomenal, and it's getting a lot of political support as well. So, what's the way forward? I just want to ask Kumar and Greg that what's the way forward? How do we approach this?
So one of the things I will jump in first, Greg, if you're okay. There is the next step which I think we are not talking about. There is one, the availability of data. The second one is the question I often get is how much does it cost? We don't talk about it. Let's be honest about it and talk about that. And along with cost comes the business model. So I think that's a topic we should absolutely have as a community, so that people are now know where the data is, and then they can actually talk about how they can acquire the data and so on. Going back to your question about the modeling scenarios, I think the good news is, especially with the climate change you started talking about, 3D models, and by the way, 3D models can range from 10 meter pixels to half a meter or even better. Now people are actually using the data to simulate the impacts of flooding in a given region, so that they know that which of these properties will be affected. So a similar example would be the benthic habitats and the shallow water bathymetry Greg was alluding to. The idea here is that benthic habitats are first line of defense when there is a tsunami or a disaster from the ocean, and understanding where they are, what's happening. By the way, there is global bleaching happening across the globe, and having those concrete examples on this is how a data set that could be a satellite imagery can create information that is relevant. There are papers out there. I think maybe we need to bring them all together to showcase this is the application of the data.
So, Greg, since you work for Public Foundation, which is a very good name in the development community, and they are doing very innovative stuff, uh, do you think that like such foundations and their growing interest in the field of geospatial can really make a big difference in communicating to the developing countries?
I think the shorter answer is yes, but the real answer is longer than that, and that is that it requires all of us to do this. We need to build now more stronger partnerships and alliances and collaborations in what we're doing. It's, the days in past where we have competitiveness and these sorts of things happening um, in different commercial areas and different private sector areas, and what I'm seeing, it's really interesting now that I've sort of moved from the UN side of things to the I guess the philanthropic side of things, is this realization that industry and the private sector and global organizations and philanthropic organizations really, really, really do want to help. They really do. And the question is, how do they help? and how do we bring all of that together. And so, really the first experiment in the UN space is actually the SIDS conference in Antigua. It's been brought together with resources from outside the typical UN and government resources. It's now looking at resources from family offices for sustainable development and other donors. It's taken a new model and a new approach. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, and potentially it might be something we just have no choice but to do in the future. But we need to do it all together. There's just too much to do to try and go alone. So doing this in collaborative ways and in partnerships with governments, with NGOs, with the private sector, with industry, it has its challenges, but the advantages and the benefits far outweigh those challenges, and particularly the resources that can be brought to the table.
So
So I know
basically,
that's a long response.
collaboration and sharing is the key. One is the sharing of the resources, and second is collaborative approach to make this happen. So you brought in the private sector as well, and I was listening to you when you said we want to help. But why should we even think of that we want to help? Why don't we think that we need to do this? Like, I mean, so this is our responsibility as well as the industry, that we communicate better with the national governments, both in developed countries and developing countries, and actually advance the role of our profession.
Yeah, I think it's very simple, is that we're finding now more and more that industry and the private sector is becoming more and more agile, and governments are becoming more and more constrained. And it's a fiscal challenge more than anything else. In some cases, it's a policy and governance challenge, but most of it's a fiscal challenge. So if there's ways, there's novel ways to do this and to support this, we're all living on the same planet. So, it's not like we're going to be, we're helping ourselves as well as helping others if we're doing this.
So Kumar, you have been also on the UN GGIM PSN, and you are on the board of OGC, and you have been supporting some foundations as well. Now, looking at the geospatial knowledge infrastructure, which is not only the data ecosystem fund provided by the government, but also data ecosystem coming in from the civil society, or data ecosystem coming in from the commercial sector. How do you see the the technology helping bridge this, rather bring some kind of convergence of all this, data which may have different formats, standards, or things like that, and put them into one stack, and then create a service so that the consumer is not really worried about the scales, or does the scale still matter, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Sanjay. There's a whole discussion about scale, map scales. We can get there. The way I think about this problem is if you can actually start making the problem simpler, right? If you look at what are the foundational data sets a lot of these nations need. For me, electro-optical imagery, whether it is satellite data, aerial, drones, it doesn't matter. Electro-optical imagery plays a key part of that. The next one are the elevation models. Again, what resolution we can talk about it, but those are the two key pieces that will start enabling a lot of these things. And as you mentioned, you have both public and private sources that are creating this data. So, and then now the next step is I want to take the problem and divide it into three domains, is the term we use. One is the land. A lot of times we focus on the land. And you also need to focus on what is happening on the atmosphere, because things like methane are in the atmosphere are causing the global warming, and then focus on what's happening on the ocean. So the way I think about this is, let's assume elevation models. The NASA's Shuttle Radar Topographic Mission, or SRTM, in the late 90s is the golden standard. Now I see programs from the public sector that are trying to create these elevation models at a global scale that makes it a lot more important. And then there are some, in terms of the electro-optical imagery, as I mentioned, we have the Copernicus program out of ESA, you have the Landsat 8, there are satellites out of JAXA that are collecting this data. And then you can actually combine this, and one of the things the data cube concept that came out of some of the efforts of CSIRO and was presented at UNGGIM, I think is a foundational layer to actually enable a lot of these applications. And it's that analytics ready data or data cube that starts addressing the issues with the data, consistency of the data. So we are at a point where, in my opinion, I think the standards are there. Concepts such as ARD and data cube are making the data speak to each other, and then having this repository of various data sources, where they are, which ones are free, which ones you can buy, and how much they cost. I think that's how I see all these things coming together.
So we are left with a couple of more minutes with us. So I'll take advantage of that. Greg, you have been in the government, you have been in the United Nations, dealt with the government, now you're in the development sector. Do you think that the governments across, Western or developed countries and governments across developing countries, are they very open to the new ideas of concepts like geospatial knowledge platforms or services or empowering citizens and businesses? How is the reaction of the governments in this field or to these kind of concepts?
Yeah, I think they are, and it's because I think one of the drivers behind this that we don't talk about a lot is that when we think about development at a national level or a national government level, it is those sort of national aggregations in terms of the information that's being provided. But we're seeing more and more now, not only at the local level, but at the city level. Cities now are a major driver for economy and social well-being. And cities aren't a national government perspective per se. They are local government, regional government, etc. So the role of cities and the role of the infrastructure and the economy that fits into that, and even to a degree climate and green energy, all of these things are starting to have this, I call it subnational impact and effect, but it's the city impact and effect. And if we sort of translate that to, say, SIDS or developing countries, that becomes more prevalent when you get down to village levels or community levels and some of these sorts of things. So I think that recognition is now becoming more widespread in terms of, as I said, how we downscale global data, but also how we disaggregate and get to more high fidelity data moving forward.
So that's a great news that the governments are more open and they are actually willing to see. And I also have seen a lot of new initiatives across Europe or US and Middle East and other countries too, with regards to the broader understanding of the national geospatial infrastructure and its growing role into the economy and society and addressing the climate change issues or the sustainability issues. But the fundamental remains, especially for the developing countries, that who's going to invest into building this data infrastructure or geospatial knowledge infrastructure. So last words from you that, Greg and Kumar, what do you think about a possibility of public-private sector partnership approach in building geospatial data knowledge infrastructure and services, which could be actually monetized as well if the private sector has to invest?
Greg, you want to go first?
Greg.
I think it is. I would add that there's also the opportunity for countries to support developed countries to support developing countries as well, in terms of partnering and twinning in their aid. And we're seeing that a number of countries in Africa coming from the developed world. So I think there's that, and also what's happening in the philanthropic community as well. That's more community based, but it's contributing to the whole and contributing to the pie as well.
Yeah, Sanjay, just to add to that, the technology is here. It's the public-private partnership, including the NGOs Greg mentioned, is the key to make this happen.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us as we all converse to the idea of the fact that geospatial knowledge infrastructure or geospatial infrastructure, the way you want to refer it, is very important for digital infrastructure or digital societies, the way we live in today. We need to communicate better. We need to, I think, improve our narratives and connect that narrative with the need of the political and economic leadership, that how it is addressing their challenges, how it can help them manage their responsibilities, as well as exploring a collaborative approach and co-sharing the resources through public-private partnerships and expanding that to the civil society as well. With this, I would like to thank again Greg Scott and Kumar for joining this today and sharing their thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.